Hello and welcome back to Programming with Python. In our last session, we have looked at decision control statements like if else and if elif statements. In our today's session, let's understand about loops and build a simple lock application that we all use in our daily lives. But before we do that, we have to understand what is a loop and why do we need to use a loop. So to answer these questions, let's write a simple program to print the first 5 natural numbers. From the knowledge we have so far, to do this task, all we have to do is use the print instruction and then I'll pass on the value that I want to print. So in this case, as I have to print the first 5 natural numbers, I'll repeat this print instruction 5 times and I'll pass on the respective values. Easy, isn't it? Now, what if you want to print the first 10 natural numbers? In that case, all we have to do is just repeat this instruction, print instruction 5 more times, and the task is done. Easy, right? But what if we want to print the first 100 natural numbers or 1000 natural numbers and beyond? Right? Now the task becomes extremely lengthy, tedious, and very boring as well, isn't it? Because all we are doing is write this print instruction for thousands of times. Right? Now imagine a scenario where we can just repeat this one instruction print 1000 times, similar to if we want to play a song over and over again in a recorder, we keep that song in a loop and we can play that song over and over again, isn't it? So just similar to that, if we can keep this instruction in a loop and then repeat that particular instruction as many times as we want, the task becomes extremely easy, isn't it? So this particular concept of repeating the instruction, an instruction or a set of instructions over and over again is called as the loop. So now let's understand one of the loops in Python. So to use the while loop in Python, we have to specify the while keyword followed by the condition over which this while loop will get executed. So let's take this same example of printing the first 5 natural numbers. Let me take a variable I and initialize it to 1. And here I will specify my condition as I is less than or equal to 5. Now the meaning of this particular statement while I less than or equal to 5 is that as long as this particular condition I less than or equal to 5 is true, the instruction that you specify within this while loop will keep on getting executed. Now be it 1 instruction or 10 instructions or 100 instructions or as many instructions as you want to. But the only thing is that as long as this particular condition is true, those instructions within that while loop will keep on getting executed over and over again. Right? Now, once this condition becomes false, only when this condition becomes false, the program will come out of this while loop. And once the program comes out of the while loop, if there are any other instructions after the while loop, the program will execute those instructions. And if there are no other instructions, the program will simply end. So this is the working of the while loop. Now let's go ahead and finish this program. So here I'll print the value of I and then I'll increment the value of I by 1. So now let's look into a bit more detail on how we get the output, the required output that we want with these instructions. So now initially the value of I is 1. Now it goes to this condition. It checks if the value of I is less than or equal to 5. Here as the value of I is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes, true, which means these instructions will get executed. That is, it will print I, that is, it will print 1 onto the screen and then we are incrementing the value of I by 1, which means now the value of I will become 2. Now, in the next iteration, it checks this condition again. Now the value of I is 2. So it checks is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes. And then as the condition is true, it will execute these instructions again. That is, it will print 2 onto the screen and then it will increment the value of I, which will now become 3. Again, in the next iteration, is 3 less than or equal to 5? True. It will print 3 onto the screen and then it will increment the value of I by 1, which now the value of I will be 4. And again in the next iteration, is 4 less than or equal to 5? True. It will print 4 onto the screen and the value of I will become 5. On the next iteration, is 5 less than or equal to 5? True. It will print 5 onto the screen and the value of I will now become 6. In the next iteration, is 6 less than or equal to 5? False, right? Because 6 is greater than 5. Now that the condition is false, the program will no longer execute these instructions inside the while loop. That is, the program will come out of this while loop. Now, as there are no other instructions outside of this while loop, the program will simply end. Right? So now let's go ahead and check if we are getting the output that we want. So if we observe the output, we are getting the first 5 natural numbers. Great, isn't it? Now, now in the same program, if I just remove the instruction on line 10, that is, if I remove this line 10, I is equal to I plus 1, and let's try to analyze and understand what happens in that particular scenario. Right? Now, initially the value of I is 1. It checks is 1 less than or equal to 5. True, which means this instruction will get executed and it will print 1 onto the screen. Right? Now, in the next iteration, the value of I is still 1. Why? Because we haven't changed or updated the value of I, right? Which means this condition is still true and it will print 1 onto the screen again, right? So in the next iteration as well, the I will be 1 itself, which means this condition, right? I is less than or equal to 5 is always true. Why? Because the value of I is 1 and we are not updating the value of I. So which means this condition is true always, and the program will execute this instruction forever. That is, it will print this value 1 onto the screen infinite number of times. Why? And the reason behind is that because this condition is always true. And as this condition is always true, the program will keep on executing the same instruction over and over and over again. Right? So this we call it as the program running into an infinite loop. Now, if you want to test this, let's run and see the program actually running into an infinite loop. Now, if you observe here, the program keeps on printing the values 1. Now, you might not see the full screen, but it is just keeping on printing the values 1 onto the screen. Right? So, to avoid this issue, always make sure to remember that to update the value I or whatever the variable that you are using. Right? So in this case, I'm incrementing the value of I by 1. Now, you can also increment the variable I by a different amount. That is, I can increment it by 2, by 3, or by any by any value I want it to. Right? Now, not only that, I can use different arithmetic operators as well. Here, instead of plus, I can use the multiplication operator as well to increment the value of I. And I can also use subtraction operator to decrement the value of I. And not only that, I can also use the division operator. I can also use the other arithmetic operators as well. Right? So, but the only condition that you have to remember is that make sure that you update the value of I so that it doesn't run into an infinite loop. And one more thing that you have to remember is you have to specify, the condition has to be specified over which the while loop will get executed. Right? So all you have to remember is to make sure that the condition is specified and also update the value of I. So this is the simple working of the while loop. Now, in the same program, imagine a scenario where you want to print the natural numbers from 1 to 5 except 3. That is, you want to print only 1, 2, 4 and 5 but not 3. So then how can we control the flow of this while loop to make sure that we only print the values that we want to? So in this case, so what we are saying is that whenever my value of I is 3, right? So we are making a decision here, right? So hence I'll be using the if statement. So if I is equal to 3, we have to do something so that our program skips printing the value 3, right? So to help us with that, we have a control statement called as the continue. Now what happens when we specify continue is that whatever the instructions are there post this continue statement or after this continue statement, all these instructions will be skipped and we will move on to the next iteration. That is, these instructions will not get executed and the program will directly skip to the start of the loop again. right? So this is the use of the continue statement. Now whenever the value of I becomes 3, we will say continue, and it will not print 3, or neither it will print 3 nor it will increment this value of I by 1, right? So this is how it works. Now if we check the output, we observe here that the program is stuck here. Why? Because it is not printing anything, nor it is ending the program, right? So the reason for that is, so whenever we have mentioned this continue statement, right? So whenever the value of I is 3, we have mentioned to skip that, right? To skip all the instructions beyond this continue statement. That's fine. But if you observe, the value of I is stuck at 3, right? Why? Because this statement I equal to I plus 1 will not get executed, right? Which means the value of I will stay at 3 always, isn't it? So which means now this condition 3 is less than or equal to 5 will always be true, and this will run into an infinite loop, right? So whenever you use a continue statement, make sure to update the value of I as well. So here I'm incrementing the value of I, and then I'm saying please skip the instructions, please skip the remaining instructions and go over to the next loop, right? So now in this case, now if we run the program, we will get the required output. So now if you observe, we got the output as 1, 2, 4 and 5, but not 3. Great, isn't it? Now in the same program, what if instead of skipping the value 3, whenever the program encounters the value 3, I want to break out of the loop. That is, I want to stop running that loop. Instead of finishing that loop, I want to just break out of the loop, right? So to do that, again, we have to control the flow. So whenever the value of I becomes 3, what we will do is we'll use a control statement called as break. So when I say break, what happens is that the program simply comes out of this while loop, or the program simply breaks out of this while loop and will not execute any further instructions. Okay, so now in this case, whenever the value of I becomes 3, the program sees this break statement and it will come out of this while loop, right? So now let's just check this. So let me save it. So now if we observe, we got the output only as 1 and 2, right? So now whenever the value of I became 3, the program just broke the loop, and then it hasn't printed the remaining values, right? So in this way, we can use the continue and the break statements to control the flow of the loop, right? So this is all about working of the while loop. Now let's go ahead and learn about one more loop that we have in Python. So in Python, we have one more loop called as for loop, and to use the for loop, we have to specify the for keyword, and just similar to the while loop where we have a variable, we have to specify a variable, and it could be any variable name that you want it to. So here I'll be taking the variable name as j, and then I have to specify the range of values this j can take. So here to do that, what we'll do is we will use another keyword in, and then we'll use another function, and then we'll use a function called as range of. So in this function, what I can specify is I can specify a starting value and an end value, and then this j will take all the values between those two values. Now for example, so here if I specify my starting value as 1, so my j will start with 1, and then if I specify my end value as 6, it will take all the values between 1 and 6 except 6. That is, it will take the values 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, but not 6, right? And then here I can specify the instructions that I want to execute. Say I'll just say print of j. Now if you observe in the while loop, we have specified the increment value of the variable as well, isn't it? But in the for loop, this is not required, because here we are directly saying that this j will take all the values from between 1 and 6, right? And hence we need not specify any particular increment value. But what if So by default, this value increases by 1. That is initial. So the initial value of j will be 1, and then the next value it takes is always 2, and then the next value always 3. That is the value of j will be incremented by 1 by default. Now what if, just like in a while loop, if we want to change the amount of the increment value that we want to, right? So let's say I want my j to be incrementing by 2 instead of 1. Right, so to do that, what you have to do is, in this range function that we have here, right, so we have specified the start value, we have specified the end value, and then after that you can also specify the increment value or the step value as well. So suppose if you want to increment it by 2, I'll specify it as 2. Now if we want to increment it by 10, I'll specify it as 10. Right? You can also do the negative as well. So I can decrement the value of j by 3 as well. So to do that, I'll specify it as -3. Right? So this is how you can specify the increment or the decrement value that you want in the for loop. Right? Now if you don't mention anything, by default it will be incremented by 1. And one more thing is that if you don't mention any start value in the range function, the default value that it will start from is 0. But if you want to start from some other number, you can readily specify just by mentioning the start value, let's say from 10 to 20. Right? But if you don't mention any starting value, by default it will take it as 0. Cool. So now let's try to execute the same program to print the first 5 natural numbers. So I'll say from 1 to 6, right? So here, if I just execute this program, we observe that we get the first 5 natural numbers, right? So you can use either a for loop or a while loop to execute the tasks, right? Both of them works in the similar way. And the control statements like break and continue, they are the same in both the loops, that is in both the while loop and the for loop as well. Now if I want to break this loop whenever my value of I becomes 3, so just similar to this while loop we have used, all I'll do is I'll say if I equal to 3, or sorry, if j is equal to 3, I will break the loop. And if I want to skip the value, I'll use the control statement continue. Right? So these statements continue and break, they are both similar in the while loop and the for loop as well. So this is how, so these are the couple of loops, while loop and for loop, that you have to understand in Python.